Long time no speak. I kind of took a little time off after Founders Day. So I'm going to take a look at Fantasy Grounds 4.8. Was recently released, I think, last week. Or earlier this week. So generally speaking, on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, at least once per month, there is some sort of update. Sometimes weekly. Generally speaking, the weekly updates are usually incremental, like small little like just like errata type things. Maybe some of the content creators, such as extensions, will update those sort of things. Those generally don't impact the game too much, depending on what they do. However, every few months or so, Fantasy Grounds will put out a big version change. And if you've been a loyal user and follower for a while for the Fantasy Grounds virtual tabletop platform, they have increased a lot of the development on it over the last couple of years to modernize it, update it, that sort of thing. So with that, I've just installed 4.8. And one of the best practices for myself, this doesn't apply to everyone, but I usually don't try to update anymore the minute the update comes out. I'm going to start waiting like a week. And the reason for that generally is so let people work things out, get things updated. Generally, that helps avoid probably like 50% of any headaches that you'll come across. The other thing to consider if you're kind of new or you're in the middle of developing a product is I would actually wait to update Fantasy Grounds if it isn't too late already. So if you're not already gone down that path, it's really hard to you can't really go backwards. So if you're in the middle of product development, like you're making your own modules or doing a conversion, if possible, if you can wait, that would probably be best for you. This is just my advice as a community and a fellow user. It's really difficult. It's kind of like, telling people to kick their can down the road. But essentially, if you wait about a week, most of the bugs will be squashed. And maybe try to finish your product if you're going to update. And I believe that the ideal situation would be that you have a separate instance of Fantasy Grounds on a laptop with a different license and everything so that it's completely separate from your games and such. And the reason for that is in case you're in a development stage and you don't want to be impacted by updates and such. So just stay on the version you're on and work through your product, get it finished, get it polished, and then use a test version of Fantasy Grounds and see if anything breaks, that sort of thing. And I don't know if that's explained well enough. The other thing is sometimes the Fantasy Grounds SmiteWorks developers, they have a good idea of how the platform works and what all the changes mean and such. Many of us don't understand that. Even though I've been using the platform for quite a while, there's some terminology and wording language that I really don't understand on the updates. Even though they list them, it doesn't really explain really what that is unless you start using the platform. Then you might figure it out. But I will request that they change if possible. I don't know if they will, but see if they'll change the language and put some of those updates in layman's terms, because the ones we get posted on the forums don't really explain what that means for an average user, and in some cases it doesn't even apply. So I think that the updates that come out that have all the developer notes, that could go in the developer newsletter, and the stuff that we need as end users, as just regular users, is to have just a list of explained changes that kind of basically outline what's being done to the interface and how we use the product. However, they got to remember that Fantasy Grounds is a small team. There's probably like 8 actual employees at the most, and then less than that and a little more than that with developers and third party help. But generally speaking, it's a big ask. And another thing is scattered information. That's always been a big pet peeve of mine. When I first started using Fantasy Grounds, and it's still like this today, is I have to search all over the place for information. Fortunately, I know where to look, but not everybody knows all that stuff. So, if you go to Reddit, Discord, the official Fantasy Grounds website, and the Atlassian, and then you might find a forum post somewhere. But generally speaking, there's 4 places to find information depending on what it is. But just generally speaking, I would try to stick to the Fantasy Grounds forums. At least that's more of a focal point, and start from there and work your way out. A lot of people will post on Reddit not realizing that's kind of an outpost, so to speak, so it's not really the main place. Although I have seen Doug watch that, and then there you got people watching Steam and other places like that. But the Steam forums, I don't know how well those convey the information, but I don't know. I haven't used it in such a long time. But anyways, so when you first install a major update, you'll get this thing where it says GM and all players must be on the same network version in order to connect to each other. So when there's a major update, especially to the launcher and such, you'll have the version appear, and then they kind of warn that that you guys all kind of have to be on the same page when it comes to the Fantasy Grounds version. One of the incremental updates, like 4.8.1, may not be so troublesome, but a major update such as this, because we went from 4.7.5 to 4.8. It says if you're a GM, please notify your players on which version you want them to use. So I don't know if that makes any sense, because once you update, you can't change versions. And on top of that, it says, please notify your players. So, yeah, I mean, in hindsight, you'd want to let your players know they can update. Unfortunately, though, some players are also game masters, or they want to buy dice, right? So an only way they can do that is to update Fantasy Grounds. So at that point, it's already kind of too late, or they might forget, or whatever, or they're not aware of it. So until SmiteWorks finds a solution on how to split between product updates and purchases, because that's how you get a new purchase. So, I'm sure they don't want to tell you not to buy anything. That's the whole idea, right? Is to get people to buy some products. But at the same time, it can break your extensions and your games. So it's kind of a catch-22. Do you update and take that risk, or do you ask everyone to wait? And then you got that one player who didn't see the email in time. So I don't know if that's a very good note. I mean, it's helpful if you know ahead of time, but if everyone's already kind of done it, and then you say, hey guys, don't update Fantasy Grounds, too late. Everyone's already done it. So it's kind of hard to communicate that. If you're a player, please contact your GM to figure out which version you should be running for their game. I think that should come first, to be honest, because that actually is where the miscommunication breaks down. But there again, you're not going to get this message unless you update. So that kind of defeats the purpose of this. If you are already reading this, you've already updated Fantasy Grounds, so that this doesn't really help at all. So the network format in this new version of Fantasy Grounds is not backward compatible with previous versions of Fantasy Grounds, as we were saying. If you're using the current live version and you need access to the last version, you can use settings to update to the previous channel. So you can sort of go back, but again, I don't know. But I just think that this pop-up is useful, but it's not as useful if you've already updated, right? It's telling you basically don't update, but, it's too late if you're already reading this. So just keep that in mind. When before a major update, maybe wait a week and then update. That's what I would tell my players. Or if I was in the middle of a project, I'd have a whole separate computer. I wouldn't even update it until I was done with my project. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close this, but I just wanted you to see that. And one other side thing is, it says the network format in this new version of Fantasy Grounds is not backward compatible with previous versions. So what that tells me, from experience and from reading the forums and my own experience, is that sometimes it may require you to go back and update your antivirus definition and your network firewall settings, because technically it may see Fantasy Grounds as a new program. So just remember that security updates and software updates are very fluid. They're not one and done. So even if you set up your network and you got everything all dialed in, you could have an issue come up later, especially with a network version change. Like if it changes anything to do with security or anything in the background with Unity and all that other stuff, it can potentially change the settings on your system. Has actually changed the settings. So if you do like a security update, anything like that could potentially flag Fantasy Grounds, and it has to be reset up. So that's just the nature of computing. That's not just a Fantasy Grounds thing. That's any software that has direct peer-to-peer connections. So this is kind of an older method of connection. So computers nowadays are built to protect your system from intrusion and from hacking and such. And when network changes occur, whether it be through Fantasy Grounds, your computer, or even your router, all those things have to balance. So just remember that that can come up. So if you've got players that can't connect to you, or you are a player and you cannot connect to your host any longer, or never could, you want to check out your network settings. There's a whole article on the Fantasy Grounds Atlassian about that. So anyways, that's just my initial notes on Fantasy Grounds updates. And now we can actually go ahead and look at 4.8. So I do really like this new launch screen. It's a lot better than it used to be. One thing of note that I always kind of pass this up, and I end up going to Google instead, but you have the user manual, tutorial guides, a link to all the game systems, the release notes, which will tell you essentially what was added. So if you click that and you're not sure what they did, this is the release notes that pop up. So if you click on the launcher and you go to the release notes, it'll take you right to the page that has the list of everything that was added or updated. The only thing is, I said earlier, some of this stuff is gobbledygook to an average user. So Hero Volume Dice 2 support pack has been added. Okay, that's great. If you're an Apple Mac user, Apple Silicon native support was added, which is awesome. A lot of people like that. And in the updates, dice can be thrown anywhere on the table, not just in the chat box. You will hold the Alt button when dragging dice to roll without broadcasting, so if you don't want it to show. Dice can be previewed via the dice window by hovering over dice sets. So if you guys watched an earlier video that Smiteworks put out, they showed that. Dice window reworked to add support for separate tray, roll scale, as well as preview on hover. So the dice window where you select the dice has been changed. The Storybook navigation has been reworked. So this is the actual reference manual of the actual book. They've changed it to a long scrolling list. There's been a little pushback on that from the community, basically because it creates potential lag and such. And I know that Smiteworks is working on that, and they're going back and updating older books that are formatted with the older Storybook kind of formatting. So if you got an old module that has some broken stuff or it looks weird, just put that up on the forums. And just know that it's a known issue. And there's been some people that have complained about, on older machines, or if they have a book that has 1,000 pictures in it, the new Storybook navigation, the scrolling thing instead of page by page, is throwing people off. And I think there's a reason why they did this navigation. I don't think it was just to do it. I believe they're preparing for future updates and such. So there is a method behind their madness, but in the interim, it's breaking old modules, and anybody that's in the middle of creating their own module, this might cause some grief. So before you give up and kick your computer screen, reach out to customer service, have them explain to you, why was this changed? And then ask them, well, since it's broken or I can't figure out how to fix it, can you help me? They might have a way to take a script or go through your XML file and update it so it'll work to salvage your work. So just communicate with them before you freak out. PC portrait and NPC picture fields will fit the image to the full field size. I think that's something more of an aesthetic that I think it's because it had like borders and such or something like that. I don't remember. Built-in dialogue color scheme revised. I don't know what that is. So I think that's where you do the color selection. So nonetheless, this stuff here, this dev stuff doesn't mean much to us if you don't develop extensions and such. So this is the stuff that I'm saying, like some of this doesn't mean anything to anybody, because if you don't use a certain rule set or you don't care about the dice or if you rarely use the Storybook and you're using the old story entries, that sort of thing, a lot of this stuff doesn't mean much. So I'm hoping that I'm going to ask if they will change this, because I think that these last things could be in the developer newsletter. So if you develop for SmiteWorks or you're making your own rule set and such, if you're on that list, this is the stuff that you need to know, or even have this posted in the lab where they beta test. This stuff here, these will probably only make sense unless you've actually been using Fantasy Grounds for a while. But these two are good. So this is pretty self-explanatory. They added another dice set and they have support for Apple Silicon. So it's kind of a difficult thing to ask a small company too. So I can't hammer on them too hard, because if they don't have the way, because this alone is probably enough to keep track of. I'm sure they got a list of different things they got to keep track of, but I don't know. I don't know if this is the way for average users, that is. I mean, if you've used Fantasy Grounds, you know where to look, you know what kind of things to look for. But if you're new, and we're talking about the new user experience, it isn't always about me or about people who have been using it. It also ties into people who are just getting started or are thinking about Fantasy Grounds. So this is something that I have an issue with. So, and also the information being scattered. So that's probably my top pet peeves there for at least for this year. So the dice set looks really nice. It has some variations of different archetypes or subclasses. So we'll take a look at that in Fantasy Grounds. And then we'll take a look at the new Storybook format and that sort of thing. So let's launch Fantasy Grounds now that I've kind of gone over those preamble there. And let's take a look. So I'm going to create a new campaign. And I'm going to use 5e because that's what I have content for. But if you have Pathfinder or whatever, most of the stuff will apply. And I'm going to say, I always lead it with 5e if the rule set first. Underscore, I'm going to say clean slate. And then I'm going to do underscore. Let's go with 4_8. So I'll know that this was a clean version of Fantasy Grounds, and I can, and it also has a rule set in front. So if you use multiple rule sets, that helps, because when you go in the back end to look at your campaign folders, you're not always going to necessarily know what every single campaign was for. So you at least want to differentiate it with the rule set in front and then name of the campaign. That usually helps sort that out in the back end. I'm going to put it on a local area network since I'm not going to be connecting online. And I don't think I need to enable any extensions or themes. So generally, when you first start Fantasy Grounds, you don't really need a bunch of the stuff in the beginning. And as a matter of fact, if you don't use a theme, it usually has a default theme. You want to check that out first and then try a different theme later and see. Sometimes the themes haven't been updated all the way, or it hasn't caught up to the recent changes. So you might see a field that's missing, or maybe it's covered by one of the theme elements, or maybe you got an old theme from back in the day. So you want to check those before you apply them, and maybe have a test. So this clean slate, I'd probably use this to test my extensions and look at content before I put it in my regular game, because I don't want to break anything I got going on. And this is a good way to mitigate some of the problems you might run into. So instead of running your campaign with a new version, you may want to start a clean folder and test from there, and then slowly add things back in, throughout the week or however long you have between sessions. Hopefully you've got more in a day. And don't update right before your game. They always say that. Let's see. So no, I'm not going to put any extensions on. We'll just hit start and we'll see what happens. So that's another thing, is I like to wait now. I used to want to just be the first one and take a look at all this stuff, but I hate to say this, but I'd say 60% of the time something blows up on my face. So I'm done with that. So I wait a week, and normally most of the bugs are worked out. So once a new product's released, I'm going to wait a bit and not actually get in a big hurry to to look at it, because the last 3 I've done, I've had some, no matter what I've done, I've touched something on a different rule set or a different feature, and it's just boom, just blows up in my face right on a live stream too. So anyways, so this is campaign setup. Normally this is what you'll face when you start. You check over here in the text area in the box on the chat window. It's 4.8, and I just have the 5e core rule set loaded. Don't have any content yet. So I'm going to click on the show on load. I don't necessarily want this to pop up every time, so I'll go ahead and unclick that, so when I come back in this campaign, this window won't pop back up. Hit next. Now this is where you load your modules or your adventures or accessories. I'm just going to click the 2024 core rules. And then I think I have one adventure that I might load. So let's take a look at that. I don't even remember what's the latest adventure. That's Unearthed Arcana. So I haven't messed with that, so I'm not going to play with that right now. I want a new adventure. What was the last adventure put out? I forget. It's been a while. Let's see. I think it was, I don't know. I wanted to look at that for formatting. I'll just load something. I'll do Vecna. That's fairly new. Yeah, Eve of Ruin. Oh, the Infinite Staircase. There we go. I'll load that too. Let's see, stair. I don't even know if I have it. Yeah, I do. Quests from the Infinite Staircase. Okay, those are 2 fairly recent modules, and the reason I'm loading those is because I want to look at the formatting. And then maybe I'll get a really old one, like, I wouldn't say Lost Mine, because that's probably already fixed. Let's look at, I don't know, let's check, let's see, one of the accessories for the players for the legacy stuff. Not Elemental Evil, that was kind of broken, or that was too old. Let's go with, I don't know, let's go with the Giants thing here. Let's see, is there a Storm Kings of Thunder? Let's look at that. Stormwreck Isle, there we go. So I'll load up that. That's not too old though. Let's go with Storm Kings of Thunder. Okay, so I've loaded a bunch of new and old modules. We'll take a look at that when we're actually looking at the formatting. And once you're done selecting your content, then we go to next. And if you're going to change any options, this will be the time to do it. I don't need to change anything, so I'm just going to hit finish. All right, so let's take a look at these dice. So if you can see, when you roll these, they now record into the chat window, whereas before they would just disappear, not do anything. So I'm going to pick it up and hold the Alt key. Now you're not going to know because, you know, I'm the GM. But there is you can get it to stop broadcasting by holding the Alt key when you roll. So that's a nice thing in case you got players that want to mess around with the dice. And that's been a kind of a ongoing back and forth debate. There's some people who don't like the changes, some people that do. There's reasons for and against. I'm cool with it. I don't mind it. But you can actually see the dice, which is nice. And then let's look at the dice window. This is where you select and change your different dice. So let's go to dice. Very cool. So why I said that was because when they first started launching this window, the scaling of it was starting to get really heavy. So in other words, when you open up the dice button, it took it about 3 to 5 seconds to open because it was trying to cache the entire list here of dice. Now they have a drop-down menu, and you can look at whatever set that you own. So the newest and latest and greatest is Fantasy Hero 2. So now it's only showing those, which is a good way to group it out, filter it out. Now looking at these, you have 2 variations of different subclasses. So you have the Alchemist, the Engineer, the Gunslinger, the Investigator, the Jester, the Ninja, Psychic, Samurai, Swashbuckler, and Witch. So these are kind of like archetypes for your players or maybe even NPCs. And then you have this this really cool effects version. So if you're somebody that has a really old computer with with old graphics cards, integrated graphics, you may want to just use one of the regular sets that has less animation. But for those that have more higher end computers and don't have any problems with Fantasy Grounds, definitely check out these things here. And if you notice, as I'm hovering over with the mouse down below, it's showing a preview now of the dice. So even before I pick them, I can kind of look to see what dice are which and what they're going to look like before I actually commit to it. You still have recoloring options on different sets. So these themed sets, not so much. Also up here, you have the dice tray size. So in this case, I might go down to 100. I don't need it at 120, but the roll size, you can change. You can change this so they're not so huge. You can come down to 80% if you want and just roll it like that and have a small dice. But I think the intent here was to improve the visibility. And you have all these beautiful dice sets. You want to see these. So I want to take I like the Samurai, I think. So yeah, here's the Samurai set. And now when I pick this up, I can right click and add more dice to the pool, throw those, and there we go. Let's take a look at the animated one. So the animated one has these little stars, and then it has like this swirling blade thing. So let's see what that looks like. Oh, that's cool. So like slice and dice type thing. And then, like I said, you can increase it up to 200%. So let's look at 200%, and let's look at a different set. So here's the swashbuckler set here. Word to your mother, it says. How cute is that? So we'll do that. I win. So it's got these little, it has these little text things, which I really think is kind of a neat touch. So let's take a look at, here's the 100. And there is some kind of way they measure velocity. So if you just drop the dice, like if you pick it up, click it, and you just drop it, it's not going to roll. So that's kind of like the old behavior. But if you do any shaking at all, it's going to recognize the velocity and create that as a roll. Like I said, if you're a player or GM, you can hold the Alt key, and supposedly it won't broadcast to the other client. So if you roll and you don't want anyone else to see it or notice it, then you can do that and it won't show the dice. So that's kind of a good thing, I guess. So that's a really neat upgrade for the dice. And I do like that they change that. Now, if you have a dice set that can be recolored, like let's look at, here's the Annulus of Focus dice. And here's what they'll look like. And here's one that's, if you got this little palette, it means you can color those. So here's a mid-tone. And then if you go up to the color selector, yeah, this is what was changed. They changed this thing here, so it's a lot nicer. So maybe you want to go with a little bit more red, put a touch of green in there. I kind of want purple, so I'm going to, there we go. The alpha doesn't really work that great on the dice, so it's not going to change that much. But anyways, if you wanted to use a different color from, like, let's say your background here, let's say you want the dice to match the theme of the interface. So if you click on this little eyedropper, you can click on elements in the game and then you hit OK, and it will update the dice to match whatever color you clicked on. So that's for the body. Now I'm going to change the text to like this golden color. So I'm going to click on text, click on the eyedropper. I'm going to find some of this gold. There we go. So now it kind of matches the actual interface, the background. So if you want to do something like that, you can. Well, let's see what this looks like as a roll here. So to add the extra dice, you just right click as you pick up the dice. So that's pretty sweet. Pretty nice. So if you like dice, there you go. That's the latest set, is the this Hero 2, which has different archetypes or kind of like themes. And then Hero 1 has more of your like barbarian, bard, cleric, such. If you're interested in these dice sets, I put an affiliate link at the end of the video. So if you want to help support the Fantasy Grounds Academy, if you click through our store affiliate, it'll just take you to the online official Fantasy Grounds store. Unfortunately, Steam is not supported unless you want to buy from the Fantasy Grounds store. So anyhow, this is the dice, new updated interface. I do like the dice skin selection because it's kind of getting, I wouldn't say upset. I was concerned that the dice was taking too long to load. And I think what was going on is it was trying to cache every single set. So if you used this a couple months ago and you clicked on the dice button for the first time, it hesitated. It was like, it was hammering it essentially. But now that they've done something with this dice selection window, now it's only going to display one at a time, which is not so hard on memory. It doesn't have to load up all the dice at once. So I think that was a good move on their part for optimization for memory, because I was gonna reach out to them and say, what are you guys gonna do? You're gonna add a bunch of dice and it's gonna be this huge list? Well, here's what they did. So that's good. All right, so that's the main thing that was added, was the dice set and then the ability to roll the dice anywhere. So you can roll it and it will still record. Like I said, if you hold the Alt key and roll, it won't broadcast it to the others. And then on top of that, you have the preview where if you hover over the dice in the dice selection window, down below there, you'll get a preview of what it's going to look like before you actually pick that dice. So that's pretty nice. Then you have control over the size of the desktop rolling and the size of this tray down below. So being that we can roll anywhere, I can just make this 100% instead of 120. And then when I pick it up, it's obviously pretty big, so I don't have to worry about that. But if you don't want it that big, you just scale down the roll size. Now I went to 100%, and if I roll now, it's not huge. It'll match the tray size. So it's just kind of up to you, this flavor, such. And the other thing is that, your players can buy their own sets, or you can buy them for them, or they can buy them for you. That's one of the few expenses that a player's really ever going to have as far as Fantasy Grounds goes. They can still use the demo, but if they want to buy dice, they're going to have to get a license and set up their own account. So that is something that some people don't care for, but I think it's fair. I mean, I buy everything. I buy 99% of everything. And your players can obviously buy you some dice too. And the advice on that is to have them buy it at the store separately as a separate purchase, and then gift it to you through the Fantasy Grounds Forums store. If you want to do it through Steam, you're probably going to have to use a Steam gift card, something like that, in order for them to benefit. But as far as the Fantasy Grounds store, that's how it's done. So that's basically the main change for dice. Now let's take a look at the Storybook. So if you click on Library on the right-hand side and go to Modules, that's one way to view your content, right? This is kind of the old way. And you also can go to the store, you can export a module you're working on, and you can activate other modules by clicking on that. So this was the older interface that we're used to, that a lot of us know about. The other thing is stories used to be the module essentially. So when you go to World, which used to be in Campaign, click on Story. The older modules will still have these story entries in here. So this is the older legacy stuff. I still kind of like this modular kind of page by page thing, and you can use the arrows to navigate. I guess it's because I'm nostalgic, maybe. And I actually trust this more because recently when they did the updates, if you built story entries, you'd at least had that and you wouldn't have lost a lot of work. But anyways, so this is just a way to sort through information, and this is the older way that modules were constructed, was through these story entries, and they were all linked together. But now most books have reference manuals and they kind of look better. So let's click on books, which is kind of like your library, like if you had a bookshelf on the back. I kind of wish this had a preview image, kind of like the other. Instead of having this link here, I think it would be nice if it had this little, this little symbol here instead. But I think this saves a little bit of memory and it's more consistent. Because sometimes people who make modules don't have a consistency with the format of the image. So you might have a bunch of weird mismatched images in here. So it's not going to look nice anyways. But I kind of wish there was more of a way to symbolize these as this little button. But that's getting picky. So let's take a look. So let's look at the Stormwreck Isle. And it looks like they've already kind of worked on it. But what's happening now is you can go through the entire adventure pretty much by just scrolling to the right. Or you can use this next section, which will kind of bring you down to the next area. So it's kind of a way to skip through these sub-chapters, I guess is what these are. Whereas before it was kind of like you clicked here and you clicked there and you click, you had all these clicks. And I think that some people lost formatting, or the older modules will look kind of funky. Until Smiteworks has time to go back, and they've done a lot of them, but they got to go back and fix some of those. So if you're someone working on an adventure and you're like halfway through it, try to finish what you're doing. Show Smiteworks, maybe send them your XML files, whatever information you have, and they might be able to go and help you with that, because that would really suck. I've seen people recently in the middle of creating something and now all this stuff is messed up, the formatting here. So if you guys are that person or those people, you definitely want to get a hold of Smiteworks and yell at them and let them know what you're doing, and maybe they'll be able to give you a solution. Sometimes they're able to go in and just write a script and take it and fix all that stuff for you. So we'll see. But anyways, the formatting basically is similar, except for now, instead of page by page, you have, you can actually go through and scroll through the entire adventure if you wanted to, with the scroll on the right. So let's see, where does this go? So you can see it goes through this whole introduction in one scroll, and then you can go over here. So let's take a look at something even newer. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, so is this one optimized the same way? Yeah, so some of these are going to be different. Let's take a look at the monster manual. That's got a lot of images in it. So it looks like they did a chapter, sub-chapter. So this formatting here is a little different. And I am noticing a little bit of lag because of the images. And I think they're working on that. So if you've got an old computer and it's taken, a minute to load the section up, it's likely because the images are loading, and it's loading all the images instead of just the ones that are needed. So I think they got to go in and redo some of these chapters so that it's not a big bite, like smaller bites, I guess, in caching images. So I think that's something to do with it. But this functionality, I don't know for sure, but I think this has something to do with an online reader, or maybe they're going to change the way they, navigate through Fantasy Grounds. I'm not sure, but I know it has something to do with future updates. So we'll see what happens. But for the time being, reach out to Smiteworks if you have issues with this, with your module, especially the older ones, and they'll try to give you a hint or an idea. Sometimes it just takes some time to get around to fixing the module. So that's just going to be a matter of them getting around to cleaning up whatever messes are left over from the updates. But that's the majority of the changes that I can see right off. So new dice set, new dice functionality, new book formatting, in which I think they're doing something in the future with it. And then image caching is going to be an issue. It doesn't matter if you've got a top of the line computer or a potato. It's still going to be problematic if it's not optimized, because there is a limit. Even if you've got 128 megabytes of RAM and a 8 gig video card or 16 gig video card, it's still going to there's actual compute limitations. So it's not going to matter that much. Although if you have an old computer, this stuff might not even load at all. So if you can, try to update your drivers, maybe update your hardware in the future. I'm afraid that it's starting to get to the point where Fantasy Grounds is advanced enough to where it's going to start requiring a bigger computer. And that's one of the reasons why the some of the platforms that are online are still problematic for people with older machines, so they just can't handle all the graphics and all the caching and all that stuff. So it's just a compute thing. There's nothing we can do about it other than hopefully they can optimize it so it doesn't crash our systems or create a situation where we got to buy a new computer. I know people don't like doing that, so you might alienate these lower end machines as time goes on. I'm starting to slowly see that over the last couple of years. It's just people who have been able to play before and they've come on to the forums and say, look, man, I can't do anything anymore. It's not loading. It's not doing anything. It's really tough to diagnose because everyone's got different setups. Maybe their hard drive is full. They don't know it. They could have hard drive failure. It could be everything and all at once. So it could be a combination of Fantasy Grounds or computers overheating or, so there's all kinds of things that contribute to these problems. But it becomes very noticeable when you use a powerful versatile tabletop like Fantasy Grounds and you start loading up a bunch of maps with line of sight and such. So I think people get kind of hung up on number specs. It's not really all about those numbers. It's more to do with computing limitations and size of dimensions and such. So when you have an image, let's say like this, the original image, the actual file itself may only be like 1 megabyte, right? And the dimensions might be like 1920 by 720, which is probably pretty decent. Like most computers can handle that. But when you actually start resizing this and you expand this, that also expands the display area, the number of pixels that's required. So even though if the quality is crappy, it still takes, X and Y and to display all that. And then on top of that, if the image is really big and high resolution, it makes it a little bit slower to transfer back and forth between your players and the host, and it creates more demand for your memory. Now, I don't know exactly what Unity is doing with their platform, but they did a recent change that's supposed to help with the CPU scaling. And of course, they added the Apple Silicon support. So hopefully that will help with some of those memory issues. And I know there's been a lot of people that have experienced this over the months since, Fantasy Grounds is growing, right? So that doesn't mean everyone's computer is growing or the limitations of computing has changed. So we've got to kind of balance that somehow. And I guess the thing is less is more, I guess, is still, that's what I believe in anyways. Some people don't like that. They're like, oh, I shouldn't have to do that. Well, there are limitations. You do what you want. But I just know that the more you expand these screens out with these large images, it puts a little bit bigger load. And if you've got several images shared with your players and they're pretty good size, like this has been optimized for Fantasy Grounds, but I've seen people with 8K images and they're high quality, really large. They're probably like a gig in size. I was like, wow, I didn't know you were doing that. Like they're sharing that across the network and they're trying to play on it. And it's probably like an area map that has a whole bunch of different locations on it and such. I find that those don't work very well if you put like line of sight and all that stuff on there because it's just so mammoth and it's so large that it just hammers your system. And it doesn't matter if you've got a high-end computer or not. It's gonna cause issues. So I think that keeping the images under 4K, and we're talking about dimensions, not necessarily the file size, although that does help. WebP format instead of PNGs does really good trade-off for the file definition and the quality. And then also it keeps the module size down. So if Fantasy Grounds kept using PNG files, and you've got a book that's like 300 pages and it's got like over 100 pieces of art in there, that page count and the file size grows. So if a module is over a certain, like 100 megabytes, it just takes forever to update them from the updater. So when you download it initially, and then when there's a bunch of updates, it takes a long time to update. So I think they try to keep it down to a manageable medium so that, so it's not taking as long and it's not filling up your hard drive and that sort of thing. But then you have these dimensional issues here with map sizes. So something like this map here is probably fine, but there are other maps I've seen that are really colorful and beautiful, and you can zoom all the way in. They look really good. But the problem with it is when you share that across a network, if you got people with older computers, they can't really necessarily handle that quality, and it might even crash your system. So